From the Cronkite studios in downtown Phoenix, this is Cronkite News.
Good evening and welcome to this special edition of Cronkite News on Arizona PBS. I'm Madeline Holler. Tonight, we take a look back at the top stories from our Washington, D.C. bureau, from immigration rallies to the impact of Africanized bees.
Arizona had the third highest number of missing or murdered indigenous women, according to a recent report by the Urban Indian Health Institute. The problem is vast, the solutions are varied, but advocates say the first step will be getting their stories out. That was the message they delivered today at the Indigenous Peoples of the U.S. Subcommittee hearing in Washington, where Cronkite News reporter Micah Bledsoe was on hand.
The women at today's hearing all agreed on one thing. They need more resources to deal with the problem. But they said they can't get resources without good data to make their case, and they can't get good data without resources.
North Dakota Representative Ruth Buffalo says she wishes she had more data to prove just how prevalent the problem is, which is why she came to Washington today.
So I believe the federal government does need to look at a comprehensive long-term plan and also look at ways to enhance or support local city, county, and state governments.
It was a moment of calm after a sometimes emotional hearing. New Mexico Representative Deborah Holland teared up while saying she wore red in support of her missing and murdered sisters.
All of your work is so important, and I'm grateful for every single thing all of you have done to raise this issue, and I want you to know that I stand behind you 100%.
Witnesses say it's a local issue, but it will take federal help to find a solution, which should include a comprehensive long-term plan focused on resources.
We have to deal with the crisis of domestic violence and sexual assault. Oftentimes, those crimes escalate to murder and homicide. So we need funding for our victim services and our tribal law enforcement.
Tribal victims face many challenges, including layers of law enforcement and a lack of reporting. And University of Kansas professor Sarah Deer says there is another problem. Predators often target Native women for trafficking.
Native girls are targeted in part because they're considered versatile, meaning they can be advertised on the internet as Hawaiian or Asian.
Tohono O'odham Nation Vice Chairman Verlin Jose says it's important to raise awareness of all domestic violence victims, but that Native women seem to be forgotten.
Those are the forgotten. As somebody's mother, as somebody's sister, as somebody's daughter, and that's why it's so important.
In an emotional opening statement, Arizona Representative Ruben Gallego called on advocates and victims to keep the issue alive.
We must prioritize intergovernmental communication to reduce the lag time responding to these atrocities, and we must change the law enforcement protocols to improve the proactivity in combating violence against Indigenous women.
Arizona House members unanimously passed a resolution earlier this week that would establish a task force on missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls in the state. That bill is now awaiting action in the Arizona Senate. In Washington, Micah Bledsoe, Cronkite News.
Arbitration. We hear about it in sports negotiations, we hear about it in labor disputes, but some say the system, which is supposed to cut down on legal costs, is being abused by corporations.
Now, some lawmakers in Washington are looking to end the practice of forced arbitration, and an Arizona resident was there today to talk about her experience with the issue.
Love Junius is live in our Washington bureau with the details on today's announcement.
We all have done it. Check the box that says I agree to all the terms and conditions without reading the fine print or even having a chance to read it. That happened to Maricopa resident Akila Edwards, who said it ended up hitting her in the pocketbook.
Edwards said she was in school and a parent when she needed money and took out a loan.
I took out payday loans, several brick and mortar, and also from online payday loans.
Applying was simple, just a few electronic signatures from her to complete the application. A little too simple. Edwards realizes now.
All of the guidelines that fall under the agreement comply with your electronic signature. So it's not like you get a chance to go in and read over each particular clause and sign off on those clauses. Those clauses are actually signed for you the moment that you agree to the loan.
Fine print included a statement that she could not go to court if she had beef with the lender. It would have to go to the arbitrator. That's not right, says Connecticut Senator Richard Blumenthal, who's introducing legislation to prohibit such mandatory arbitration clauses.
That is fundamentally unfair and un-American, and that's why we are introducing the Forced Arbitration Prevention Act.
Michael Clark, vice president of the American Arbitration Association, says there is a place for such standard clauses. They help allocate fees and expenses. He concedes that they can be hard to get out of.
You could go, then take it to court and try to appeal it, but there's something called the Federal Arbitration Act of 1926 that sort of details what. It's very unlikely that an arbitration could be overturned.
Edwards fought the fight in federal court and won.
Because there was a lot of illegal aspects being done, not only just locally, but also in the federal aspect.
In fact, the lender behind her loan ended up in prison, she says.
CEO of the company, the owner of the company, which I won't say state, but they did end up getting prison for their act and their involvement in what their loan company did.
And she hopes to win this fight in Congress, too.
In addition to Senator Blumenthal, today's event was attended by Congressman Hank Johnson of Georgia. He said another way to look at arbitration bills is that they're about restoring the constitutional right to trial. In Washington, Love Junius, Cronkite News.
A House committee, meanwhile, called on border officials to defend their handling of the Trump administration's policy of separating families at the border. Micah Bledsoe was at the heated hearing and reports from our Washington bureau.
When a stranger rips a child from a parent's arms without any plan to reunify them, it is called kidnapping.
That statement from House Judiciary Committee Chairman Jerry Nadler was one of the milder ones at today's hearing on the policy of separating children from parents at the southern border, a policy that Democrats on the panel attacked as uncaring.
This administration is responsible for the harm suffered by thousands of children and their parents.
But Customs and Border Protection Chief Carla Provost defended her officers' work in a difficult situation.
Debate about whether this constitutes a border security crisis or a humanitarian crisis. Let me be clear, it is both.
She chafed at accusations that children were not properly tracked by the many agencies that had a hand in their care after they were separated from their parents.
What the numbers don't show is how my men and women care for these vulnerable populations with the limited resources that they have.
Last fall, however, the Southwest Key shelter in Arizona was shut down after a worker was convicted of abusing minors. Arizona Congressman Greg Stanton says it's important to get answers, particularly in affected states like his, which bear the brunt of border policies.
In Arizona, what was going on even before there was a formal policy of family separation? Was there an informal policy?
Republicans on the panel were generally low-key, but some were as angry as the Democrats.
Mr. Chairman, make no mistake, there is a crisis on our southern border, one created by Congress's unwillingness to act and perpetrated by Democrats' open borders policy that allows drugs, guns, gangs, and human and child trafficking operations to spill across our border.
Stanton welcomed the debate on border security, but says there needs to be a limit.
We should have a healthy debate about what our border policy should be, but never the result of it should be taking kids away from their parents.
In Washington, Micah Bledsoe, Cronkite News.
Today's hearing was the first for the Judiciary Committee since Democrats took over the House, and another of many House hearings that are challenging Trump administration policies.
While state lawmakers are looking at ways to make refugees feel more welcome, federal lawmakers today turned their attention to immigrants.
House Democrats unveiled the Dream and Promise Act in Washington.
The bill would solidify protection for recipients of deferred action for childhood arrivals and those who have temporary protected status.
Alyssa Klink in our Washington bureau was on hand today as the bill was introduced.
Supporters say the Dream and Promise Act could give a pathway to citizenship to as many as 2.5 million immigrants currently living in this country, but living here with no guarantee they can stay. The certainty she believes she would get under the bill is what brought out dreamers like Jessica Garcia, who refers to herself as a citizen in waiting.
And it's my experience as a young person of diverse background that makes me a strong, passionate, and determined U.S. citizen in waiting.
The bill would protect people like Garcia. It would also give undocumented immigrants better access to in-state tuition and scholarships, something Arizona Representative Greg Stanton said will boost Arizona's economy.
I believe that no region of the country would better benefit from a DREAM Act than our region in Phoenix, Arizona, taking tens of thousands of young people, 100,000 across America, taking them out of the shadows and putting them fully into our economy, giving them full education opportunities.
But Ira Melman at the Federation for American Immigration Reform said Congress needs to put the interests of the American people first.
Well, you know, it's interesting that it's called the Dream and Promise Act. The first thing here is that nobody promised them anything. Nobody promised that when, you brought your kids to the United States illegally that they would be given some kind of amnesty.
Stanton thinks that higher education for immigrants means a better economy, something that non-citizens who have lived in the U.S. since childhood deserve.
This aspect of it, giving these young people certainty that they can stay here, complete their education, serve us in the military, take their rightful leadership place in our community, that needs to be dealt with right away.
So the bill's backers say they already have more than 200 co-sponsors, and the bill is expected to pass in the Democrat-controlled House. But its fate in the Republican-controlled Senate is another story. In Washington, Alyssa Klink, Cronkite News.
Another Trump administration plan was in the spotlight today. The Department of Homeland Security wants to change the definition of public charge, the standard that determines whether individuals are inadmissible to the U.S. based on things like the amount of public assistance an immigrant receives. And that has local officials concerned, as Micah Bledsoe reports from our Washington bureau.
The public benefits that DHS is eyeing include food stamps, housing, and healthcare assistance for immigrants here legally on visas or seeking green cards. Officials at the National League of Cities Conference here worried that those changes could have a far wider impact on their communities.
Everybody should be worried about those and what that really means. I mean, it seems like things need to be fleshed out a little bit more so we can have a better understanding of that.
Arredondo Savage was part of a packed panel discussion today on the proposed expansion of benefits covered under the public charge law. She says the change would definitely hit Arizona's 28,000 DACA recipients, but would be felt in the larger community as well.
So when you just think of that little population, think of all the other ones that we don't even know that are there, how important it is to make sure that they're taken care of, they feel safe, and they're included, because they are really part of our culture, not just in Tempe, but as in Arizona too.
Jackie Vimo, a policy analyst with the National Immigration Law Center, says in order for immigrant communities to feel safe, they need to have access to proper services and resources, but they need to be properly informed about the changes as well.
Your life is more than your immigration case. We don't want a generation, 20 years from now, of kids who didn't get early childhood development, that didn't get the food and nutrition that they need because their parents were scared, and then we're going to have to be paying for that in years to come.
That's why city officials here say they keep a close eye on the changes.
We need to be that squeaky wheel. We need to be that voice. We need to get together and make sure that Congress is listening to us and that the president is listening to us.
Arredondo Savage agreed.
But I think what we heard today was it's important to put it on your radar and to really know what those impacts could be, because it obviously is going to be something that's very negative to a lot of people.
It's not clear if or when the change to the public charge rule will take effect. DHS has to wade through more than 266,000 public comments that were made to the change before they can propose a final rule. In Washington, Micah Bledsoe, Cronkite News.
It was just over 8 years ago that a Tucson shooting spree killed 6 people and wounded 13, including then Arizona Congresswoman Gabrielle Giffords. Those injuries forced Giffords to resign from Congress, but not from public policy debates, as Cronkite News reporter Alyssa Klink reports from our Washington bureau.
Former Congresswoman Gabby Giffords has been pushing for what she calls, quote, responsible gun ownership, almost since that 2011 Tucson shooting. Like her recovery, it's been a long struggle, but one she is not giving up on. Former Arizona Congresswoman Gabby Giffords has given this speech before.
Now is the time to come together, be responsible.
But today's speech came on the eve of a House vote on the Bipartisan Background Checks Act of 2019, one of the major priorities of the new Democratic majority in the House. The bill would require a background check on every gun sale or transfer, a move that 97% of Americans already support, according to Giffords.org.
The people in this country want to see this legislation passed.
Supporters say the bill will make it harder for people to skirt existing laws, including avoiding background checks by sharing firearms. But critics say the law would do that by burdening legitimate gun owners and their Second Amendment rights.
It's at the heart of what our founding fathers intended, that all Americans should have the right to use firearms to defend themselves.
And defend others, says Congressman Randy Weber, a Republican from Texas.
The only thing that stops a bad person with a gun is a good person with a gun.
Despite opposition from most Republicans in the House, the bill is almost assured passage since it has 233 co-sponsors. Its fate is less certain in the Senate, but Giffords, speaking in the shadow of the Capitol today, had a message for supporters of the bill.
We must never stop fighting. Fight, fight, fight.
While Arizona Democrats are signed on to the bill, the state's Republicans have not. Congresswoman Debbie Lesko, a Republican from Peoria, said on the House floor today that the bill is, quote, well-intentioned but will not solve the problem. In Washington, Alyssa Klink, Cronkite News.
Innovation in government may bring big high-tech advances to mind, but not every innovation comes from tech centers on the coast, and not every advance is flashy. That was the message at a New America event in Washington, where Love Junius tells us how Phoenix played a role.
Phoenix Public Works Director Ginger Spencer was invited to Washington to talk about innovation. And for Spencer, that means talking trash.
So one of the creative solutions that we have is working with a company called Palm Silage, where they are taking our palm fronds, which were basically the leaves, and basically converting it into livestock feed.
The seemingly simple solution has helped the city keep tons of trash out of the landfill and got Spencer an invitation to a New America Foundation panel on innovation in government. The Government Fix brought together city officials and foundation executives to share their experiences and how to innovate in government. Cecilia Munoz, Vice President of Public Interest Technology at New America, says innovation is vital, but it's just as important for innovation to reach the people affected by it.
What we need now is the intent, and to make sure that the people who are making policy are both equipped with the skill sets and the intention to engage the folks who are the point of this whole exercise in designing the policy.
One way Phoenix puts its innovation into action is by partnering with Arizona State University's Resource Innovation and Solutions Network, which recycles trash to create products like compost. Spencer says that keeps grass clippings and tree trimmings out of the landfill.
What we wanted to do was take some of the compost from our city-owned facility and apply that in our Parks Department. And so by partnering with Arizona State University through the RISM program, we were able to evaluate our work. It was very successful, and then also make that business case to the city and to our Parks Department to consider applying it to more city parks.
Finding new ways to introduce change is not an option, says Spencer.
Every city, in order to survive, in order to be resilient, every city has to be innovative, right? You cannot afford not to innovate.
In Washington, Love Junius, Cronkite News.
Not only do the innovations have to reach the community, Spencer says they can come from the community too. She said the idea for palm frond recycling started with a call for ideas from the public, and the city developed it from there.
The Bears Ears National Monument in southern Utah was created in 2016 with the stroke of a pen by President Barack Obama. And it was cut to a fraction of that size with another stroke of the pen by President Donald Trump. But that was not the end of the fight over Bears Ears, which continued today. Alyssa Klink has the story from Washington.
Hopi Vice Chairman Clark Huang-Tanakuva made a promise to fellow tribe members after testifying today to the House Natural Resources Committee.
I'm going to stand up. I'm going to lead the people in the right way. Hopefully something good will come out of this case right here.
Stand up to President Donald Trump, who cut Bears Ears National Monument from the 1.35 million acres approved by former President Barack Obama to just over 200,000 acres today, an 85% reduction.
We were very upset with the decision that he made, and without consultation, everything kind of came to a quick decision.
Huang-Tanakuva, along with witnesses from the Pueblo of Zuni and Ute tribes, said the lands are sacred to them, but the cuts were made without their input, a point echoed by Representative Raul Grijalva.
Voices were left out, and that the decision was a decision that was predetermined.
Critics turned the argument back on Obama, saying he never asked them about creating Bears Ears in the first place, and that the Trump administration followed the rules as best it could.
Every realignment, the realignment that Mr. Trump did, also was done by one person. I know the Trump administration tried to create a process to go by, but the problem is there are no rules. There is no process in the law for either creation or readjustments, and that's part of the problem.
Whatever the process ends up being, Huang-Tanakuva says he hopes the first people are consulted, but more importantly, that the land is preserved.
We were here first, and maybe in that kind of respect, I hope. And it's only these kind of people that will make legislative changes, that it will become permanent, that they'll respect the area also for everybody to enjoy.
In Washington, Alyssa Klink, Cronkite News.
Bears Ears was not the only monument discussed today. The hearing also looked at Trump's decision to cut the Grand Staircase Escalante National Monument from 1.7 million acres, approved by former President Bill Clinton, down to just over 1 million acres.
The Environmental Protection Agency estimates that its limits on mercury emissions from power plants are preventing up to 11,000 premature deaths a year. But at what cost? Reporter Micah Bledsoe was on hand as the EPA proposed loosening those standards, and a group of activist moms pushed back.
Phoenix mom Claudia Faldoa was under the weather, but that wasn't enough to stop her from getting to Washington to testify at EPA headquarters.
I came all the way from Arizona to Washington because I have 3 boys, and I think as a parent it's very important to protect their health.
Protect their health from air pollution that Faldoa and other members of the Moms Clean Air Force say will increase if the EPA is allowed to relax its mercury and air toxic standards, or MATS.
I mean the boys of the communities of color and low-income families, and I believe we have a voice, and it's important for me to make it here.
The changes follow a Supreme Court ruling on how the EPA weighs costs and benefits of its regulations. And the EPA now says that MATS costs as much as $9.6 billion a year for just $6 million in health benefits.
The total projected cost of compliance with MATS drastically outweighs the monetized hazardous air pollutant benefits of the rule.
Weatherhead said the EPA did not meet its obligation to weigh costs and benefits in its 2016 finding on MATS. The agency now says it's not appropriate and necessary to regulate hazardous air pollutants from major sources like power plants. But Gabriela Rivera, a regional field manager for Moms Clean Air Force who works to increase Latino civic engagement in California and Arizona, says the government should not be putting a price tag on health.
I potentially want to become a mother, and how this would have an impact on, how mercury has an impact on women who are pregnant, and how it would affect me potentially in the future, and I wouldn't want to put my future children at risk.
Faldoa says the rollback of these rules won't benefit anyone.
If we allowed more pollution when we need less, that's unacceptable. That is not right.
In Washington, Micah Bledsoe, Cronkite News.
The EPA's website says the comment period on the proposal is still open, and comments must be received on or before Wednesday, April 17th.
Spring comes early for Arizona, which is a good thing.
But the springtime weather that is warming you up is also warming up Africanized killer bees. As Love Junius reports, that may not be a good thing.
In Arizona, it's a longer time because of the temperatures. What happens is during that time, people are more active and they encounter the bees more because they're out.
They may not always live up to their nickname of killer, but Africanized bees are aggressive and will swarm and chase you up to a mile if they feel threatened. While not all bees are that aggressive, Dyke says the defense reaction of the Africanized bee is natural for any bee.
If you walk by a hive or disturb a hive, those bees' first response is to defend that hive. And so that's when people get stung. If you are stung, try to get the stingers out as quickly as possible.
In Arizona, that can mean finding a hive in a cactus, says Gloria Hoffman, a honeybee researcher at the USDA Agriculture Research Service in Tucson.
You can look at the cactus and see, if there's a hole, and if you see bees coming and going out of that hole, there's probably a good chance there's a nest there.
As many as 100 people die from each year from bee or wasp stings, according to the Center for Disease Control and Prevention. The Mayo Clinic says that for most people, a bee sting will mean swelling and pain for a few hours. But if there are signs of nausea or dizziness, you could be having a more serious allergic reaction. If stung, Dyke says the best way to get the stinger out is by swiping a card away from the direction it came in. If you try to pull it out, it will pump more venom into your skin. Although Africanized bees can be dangerous, Dyke says they have their good side too. They help pollinate crops and secure the diversity of Arizona wildflowers.
They are just another honeybee, but they do have kind of a nasty reputation at times.
In Washington, Love Junius, Cronkite News.
That's it for this special edition of Cronkite News tonight. Thanks for joining us. For top Arizona stories anytime, go to cronkitenews.azpbs.org.